Hi, everyone. I'm Gwen Callahan, the co-director of the HP Lovecraft Film Festival, and I'm joined with the writer-director of Gods of the Deep, Mr. Charlie Steeds, coming to us from the UK. Hi, Charlie. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So Gods of the Deep. So last year, I should mention that you were the winner of Best Feature for the film Freeze last year, which was also very Lovecraftian, and
Yeah.
we see a number of the same actors in Gods of the Deep, and also this film very Lovecraftian, as we get to see a giant Cthulhu under the sea,
Mhm.
which was an exciting moment for us when we were watching the film for the first time.
Uh-huh.
I think we kind of were like, "Oh, he went all the way there."
Yeah.
So, can you tell me a little bit about so Freeze was kind of you had sort of free reign to do what you wanted with the film, with the stipulation that it had to take place in kind of a mountainous winter setting. Um,
Yeah.
for Gods of the Deep, were there parameters that you had to follow, or were you just kind of able to do whatever you wanted to?
Yeah. So for anyone who saw Freeze last year, the interesting thing is that Gods of the Deep actually came first and was shot first, but it was finished over a year later. And that was just it was due to a whole load of reasons, but basically, the way it came around, a film company got in touch with me. They wanted science fiction. That's all. They just cared that it was a science fiction movie. So that was the parameter. And so I sent them this pitch that I'd had for a few years, which was Gods of the Deep. Um, and they liked the sound of it. The only thing was like, and still now, as I say, it took so long. It was such an ambitious idea, and for the budget, especially, it's just so ambitious. How do you do submarine and Cthulhu and underwater ruins and stuff like that? And I hate to mention budget because I feel like every filmmaker at every festival brings up budget, even when they've got, top celebrity actors. So everyone complains about their budget, but it was really like, as you can tell from watching the film, is very much like a homemade, homegrown sci-fi movie that was just, it turned out to be really tough. And everything that I did sort of wrong on Gods of the Deep, when I the next year came around and I made Freeze, I was kind of able to correct so many things, So for Gods of the Deep, I had to build this huge set. And then for Freeze, I was like, there's no way I'm building a set. I'm going to go to the locations because the locations are going to just look so much more impressive than trying to do the crazy thing of building a submarine, with like a pool of water in the center of it and all this sort of stuff. So that's how it came about.
Okay, that's wow, that yeah, it puts a different perspective for me on like the story and the production. Like, wow. Okay, so God of the Deep came first. How so I'm assuming that it took a lot of what took time was the post-production and putting in the underwater scenes of the out exteriors.
Yeah, and also part of it was COVID because what happened was I was there was the year of COVID, and I made almost no films in that whole year, and it was a panic because everything was on hold. And then in the UK, at least, the COVID lockdown restrictions changed so that filmmakers could go and make movies even though everybody else in the country was on lockdown. And so I got funding to make as I basically got as much funding as I could, and I went out and I shot 3 films back to back, and that took me through January all the way to like May.
Mm.
So it was the most filming I'd ever attempted to do all at once, and I shot my films, The Haunting of the Tower of London and Werewolf Castle, and then Gods of the Deep was the third film in that filming period. So by the time I got to Gods of the Deep, it was just like there was so much work to do. So we spent 6 weeks building the set, and it was just a lot of the actors in the film actually helped out with the set building, and actors from the other films. It was mostly just like actors, because they're all like good friends of mine. We were all, escaping the lockdown, and they were all coming and building the set together. But the set took longer than I expected and cost more money than I expected. And then the shoot was quite, there was just, because there's so much going on in some of the shots. You've got like sparks flying and fire and water, and it all comes together to make like 3 seconds of the sequence, and doing all of it in such a small contained space, because the set in the film looks way bigger than it actually was. Yeah, it basically does, because the lenses, we use such wide lenses to make it feel a bit more grand. But in real life, this little set was quite tiny. And so it was a fairly difficult shoot. And then COVID, the lockdown ended, and a lot of the locations for all of our exterior stuff that wasn't on the submarine, they all dropped out. So that's basically how it ended up taking quite so long, was because then I had to find new locations for all of the, like the command control center. All of those places had to be found fresh. So it was, to be honest, like one of the most troubled productions I've ever done, and at the same time probably the most ambitious. So not the combination that you want, really. And then the VFX, which I got to talk about, because it's when I agreed to make the film, I had a VFX company who agreed to come and do everything CGI. And I budgeted, did an effects breakdown list, and we only proceeded with the film when I knew that actually it was all achievable and I'd been quoted on the price. And then when the filming eventually wrapped and all of the extra scenes had been done and COVID problems had all been resolved, well, I guess the VFX company also had a huge wave of new jobs, because COVID had the lockdown had ended, and they just said to me, we'd love to do your film, but we just can't now, because so then I'm writing around to loads of other VFX people, but on this budget, people were looking at the effects list and going, okay, yeah, submarine and Cthulhu, and just going around, okay, that's going to be this much, and quoting me prices that were more than the budget of the entire film. And my production companies that fund me, then they're rarely sympathetic, so they don't give me any more money than what I agreed to in the beginning. And so, long story short, all of the effects basically fell on my head, and I have zero VFX knowledge at all. And so, but what I will say is, even though clearly the VFX have this homemade look to them, every single effect in the film is entirely practical. And you get loads of horror films these days saying, oh, this film is filled with practical effects, but as a filmmaker, I'm watching it and I'm thinking, it's not really all you might have one practical effect there, but everything else is, you've CGI'd this in, or you've done that. And a lot of people are going out there saying they've made these practical effects, but it's not all practical. Whereas with my film, it is absolutely all practical. Every single element you see is a model miniature, that's been done by hand. Lots of it just by me in my living room, with expanding foam and carving out little underwater ruins with pieces of foam. I had a model maker to build the submarine, and then Cthulhu itself is a person in a suit against a green screen. But all of it, that not even the water that surrounds it is generated by a computer. Everything is in camera, just layered on top of each other, so that it is completely practical.
Holy shit, I had no idea.
Yeah, there's
Wow.
no manipulation of anything. It is all just exactly as you see. This is what I saw through the camera.
Okay. So what you're telling me is there's a Cthulhu suit somewhere out there. Do you still have it?
In my garage is the Cthulhu suit. Yeah.
That's so cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So clearly you need to make another movie where you can reuse the Cthulhu suit.
I think I am going to be reusing it because I'm making a segment for a Lovecraftian anthology, and part of my involvement is because I was just like, hey, I've got fish creatures and Cthulhu, and I've got about 4 different variation of fish creature suit in my garage, and Necronomicon and all these things left over from Freeze and Gods of the Deep and other fishy monster films that I've done. So I'm just going to bring it all together to make a crazy little short segment for this anthology.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Okay, so all practical effects. There's like no CG. You just did kind of compositing and layering of
Yeah.
like
Mm-hmm.
actual in-camera things. That's fantastic. It it really lends a certain texture to the film, and I certainly watching the film with the effects. You can kind of see that they're not like what am I trying to say? They're not like state of the art digital effects, but
No, no.
there's a certain uncanniness that comes with those kinds of effects that I didn't
Yeah.
feel with this film. So that would explain why. Wow,
Yeah,
congrats.
yeah, just more of a sort of organic feel because everything that you're looking at was there and actually existed and was physically built and is a real thing. But yeah, it was just real tough. As I say, I have no VFX experience, so it was just really tough having to put all these things together. And I made way more shots than what you actually see in the film, and they just didn't look convincing. And believe it or not, the ones that ended up in the film were just the ones that felt convincing. And then there were certain story moments where I needed shots of certain things where, to be honest, I never was able to just figure out how I could do it. And to be honest, I just realized I'd bitten off probably more than I could chew, and I'd need to build probably double or triple the amount of miniatures to get all the different angles that was in my head. Um, and then there's stuff like in the film they're watching on the through the window or through the screen in the cockpit. They're watching what they can see outside the window. So that obviously all came so much later. So I had to rebuild the cockpit and in my living room, and then insert the VFX shots onto the TV, just have them playing on the TV. So just the whole process was just, I probably won't make a science fiction film again after this experience. And not only that, one of the most infuriating parts of the whole process was that I'd kind of learned what I would do differently on the next one, and had made the next one, which was Freeze, and had brought it to HB Lovecraft Festival and Fright Fest, and gotten a great response from people. So I'd already kind of done what I wanted to do, and I was almost like then in a way burdened with Gods of the Deep that had to be finished and was just so much work. But yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm glad that you persevered and finished it, and then we got to see it and our audience got to see it. I can tell I can tell you that our Providence audience and Portland audience, and Mobile audience, when we did the in-person festivals, had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah,
Lot of good response from it. So
uh-huh.
wow. So let's drill into the story a little bit. As you say, it's a very ambitious scope for the story.
Yeah.
So is it the kernel of the story that you had that just got expanded and expanded, or did you kind of come at it with the story fully realized already?
Yeah, so basically, I think because it was a long time ago when I first came up with the story, like I don't know, five or 6 years ago, um, and I think it was just through looking at all these stunning Lovecraft artworks that exist on Pinterest and things like that, and I'm looking through, and there was one that really captured my eye, which was just like a huge Cthulhu monster in the tiny little submarine. And I thought, God, that would be such a cool movie, because I'm always thinking of film ideas based around a particular location, You know, I've done haunted houses, I've done castles, I've done log cabins, and lots of these I've built as sets. And so I thought, well, how hard could it be to build like a sort of a submarine set? And because it's contained, it's probably doable on one of my budgets. So I thought, you know, that's one for in the pipeline. You know, it could be that I build this submarine and they go down to the depths, and they really, they were, in fact, even in the script that was funded, I think it wasn't just one Cthulhu. They stumble upon a whole like horde of sleeping Cthulhu creatures. There was so much in the script that never made it to the film. In fact, it's a 100-page script, and the film's like 75 minutes or something without the credits. So actually, there's a lot of the film that never made it. It was meant to begin in the Arctic with a mission where they sort of awaken Cthulhu in the Arctic, and you know, all of this sort of stuff. That was all in the script, and the character Jim, his dad, was like a real essential element of the script. Like probably of the 25 minutes of the film that never made it to the screen, it all revolved around his relationship with his dad, and the fact that his dad was this explorer who uncovered something he should never have uncovered and mysteriously disappeared. And now Jim is on this quest to kind of follow up that research, and ends up finding out way too much and reconnecting with his dad. But you know, even on the submarine, the dad is like represented by this sort of shady, shadowy character surrounded by cosmic lights. But that only came because the actor who was cast to play the dad just kind of dropped out at the last minute, which again was all to do with COVID things and cancellations with travel. And so instead of calling off the shoot day, I was just like, we'll just put somebody in a hooded suit and put some cosmic lights on them, and that can be the dad. So the dad character just got smaller and smaller and smaller until it was just this like tiny little thing. You know, and then even this is in the end of the film, you know, one of the ambitious parts of the set was that there's this rover pod where the characters are supposed to dive in and out of the submarine through the you know, the doors. And at the end of the film, in the script, Christine and Jim both get in the pod and escape and live. And we got to the part of the scene where, you know, on the shoot day, and I'm going, right, and both of you climb into the pod, and Christine's in, but there's, you know, she's barely in herself because it was so small, and there's just no way that Jim was going to get in the pod with her. So on the spot, on the day, I'm going, all right, Jim's going to have to stay behind, you know. And so, you know, I'm handing in the film to the distributors who funded the script, and they're watching it for the first time and getting to the end, and only then realizing that, oh, you've killed the main character. And it was simply because he couldn't fit in the piece of set that I'd constructed, you know. And then so then the film ended with Jim just in the corridor with everything sort of on fire and the ship going down. And that was actually the end of the film. And then this is just another reason why it took so long to get this film done. You know, I finished it and I'm watching it, and it ends, and it just wasn't working because the dad character had become so small, and Jim wasn't really meant to stay behind. And on the day we just said, all right, just sort of claps in the fire and look sad or whatever. So I decided at the last minute to get people back together once again and go and shoot this ending in the hospital with the tentacles bursting out of Christine. So, you know, that's how the film came to be. But the real nugget was just that, like, the nugget of the idea was just Cthulhu. How is Cthulhu not being the centerpiece of you know, just like a horror movie or a sci-fi movie? And I thought, if I can just do this submarine film and actually show Cthulhu for the first time in a feature-length film. Cthulhu just, emerging from the ocean, had all these grand ideas of how to do it, hoping that I would have all the help of the VFX artists and stuff like that. And then yeah, that was basically the drive to make the film, was a lot of it was just to get Cthulhu on screen.
Nice. So there is a Spanish two-parter called, it's like the Valdemar Legacy and the Forbidden Shadow, or La Sombra Prohibida, where
Uh-huh.
Cthulhu is up right at the very end.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And I think in Underwater we get to see a glimpse of him right at the very end. But
Yeah,
like his forehead, or,
yeah.
you don't
I
get to
mean,
see like full bodied in all of his glory.
yeah, like in Underwater, you get this like sort of Cthulhu-looking creature, but never before had I seen traditional winged Cthulhu with
Yeah.
the tentacled sort of mouth. And yeah, I mean, as a Lovecraft fan myself, it's like it's a shame that the one that I've got to see is the one that I've made with such a small budget and such sort of homegrown effects. But I mean, I can't wait to see, someone like Guillermo del Toro do some huge scale. I mean, it's only a matter of time until we see huge scale Lovecraft feature film blockbusters, or at least I hope so.
We can only hope. Perhaps you have been now the trailblazer for this trend of having kaiju, Cthulhu, and big
Maybe,
monsters.
or maybe I've put them off. Maybe I've maybe I've cancelled it before it's even got started.
No, I would like to think that people will see it and be inspired to do their own version
Yeah,
of it. And then please send them to us so we can show them.
yeah, yeah.
So you work with a lot of the same cast in a lot of your films. So I recognize Rory Wilton from as the captain from Freeze, and
Yeah.
the the communications officer, and a few other cast members. I'm always curious about actors who are kind of classically trained, or have gone to like through training and seem to have done other roles with that are not like sci-fi horror films. And
Yeah.
are these guys like always game for doing this stuff? Do they have fun with it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
their preferred genre.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of these actors, I mean, yeah, I mean, I have a real, as I said, with Gods of the Deep, we were shooting 3 movies in a row. So with like, for example, Rory, who plays Hank in Gods of the Deep, and Tim, who's the pilot of the submarine, Gordon, um, we just done Haunting of the Tower of London, where Tim plays Richard III and Rory plays the King, and they're sort of like killing each other and having these sorts of really melodramatic scenes. And then we went straight into Werewolf Castle, where Tim was playing like the leader of a group of knights, and Rory wasn't in that one. And then we had Gods of the Deep, where Tim's, piloting the submarine and Rory's the engineer. So it's like, these guys, I think, yeah, we just like, we have such a good time on set, and they just love coming along. And as I say, 1 minute you're the king, the next minute you're pilot of the submarine. And I think that, I mean, all the actors hate getting messy and cold. um Tim having to be covered in all of the slime, and we did shoot a scene where a tentacle like emerges from his mouth, but he eventually couldn't do it because I think his dentures were going to get caught up in the tentacle. It was all a bit too heavy. So but they're always really game for it, and when I enjoy working with these people, one film after the other, it's just like a family coming back together, and big group of friends. It makes the filmmaking so much more fun. I like to bring back a lot of the same people, but I always expand every film with like sort of 2 or 3 new people. Usually the lead actor tends to be a complete newcomer. That keeps everything fresh, but the ensemble like stays the same, and yeah, we just all have a great time.
Nice. Um, with the real cosmic scenes, like for me, like what I would consider like the money shots of like the creature coming out of the cube of tissue and
Mhm,
things like that. Those scenes have a real like eerie, creepy feeling to them.
mhm.
Are there certain films that you've watched in your life that really that influenced those types of scenes for you?
Yeah, well, when I was shooting this movie, my one of my all-time favorite films is Aliens, and then I also love Alien as well. And I was thinking for the first time I'm getting to do science fiction because I've always done horror,
Mm.
but I've never managed to do it with like a science fiction tinge. And so that was definitely in my mind the whole time was trying to just think of those like all those scenes from Aliens, making everything slimy and all that sort of like cold blue light and keeping things in shadow and all of that sort of stuff. So that was definitely an inspiration. But at the same time, with it being my first science fiction movie, um, it was so difficult. Just like writing the script was like, I know how to write a horror movie, but with science fiction, I was almost completely, it was like writing as if I'd never written before. It was like I really underestimated how hard it would be to switch genre. Even though I feel like I love sci-fi, it was so difficult. And the same kind of goes for when I was filming it. It was like a whole new thing. And as I said before, I don't think I would attempt science fiction again. But having said that, there were moments on set where like you've got water pouring through the ceiling and half of the background's on fire and machine guns are going off and there's slime and there's blood, and you go, wow, like this is the joy of making science fiction. You're really like thinking about your favorite scenes from like the Alien franchise and stuff like that, and using that as a sort of source of inspiration. But then, yeah, so there were moments where I really was having a great time and finding that it was really working. But God, yeah, it was hard. It was just difficult.
I really enjoyed the layers of obsession that were kind of run through this film with Pickman and Jim and the scientists back in the I can't remember I want to call her like the evil head lady, but
Yeah, yeah,
the head
yeah.
scientist that sent them out there. So like these
Uh-huh.
parallel threads of like I'm obsessed with this thing, but Jim's
Mhm,
obsessed with his father and Pickman's obsessed with like trying to find the secret to
mhm,
the
mhm.
thing. Is that something you consciously put in there, or is that something that just kind of happened naturally?
Yeah, well, I love the idea of like really. I think this is maybe what I like about science fiction is that I love the idea of these characters who are really they have these egos and they're throwing all this money and all this sort of knowledge that they have at going and being like big explorers or pioneers. And the first thing I always think when I read these stories or like read about this history of someone exploring this or being a pioneer of that is like, wow, you're crazy. Like you would have to be seriously obsessed with the idea of achieving something. And for me it's like it could only be ego and a bit of insanity that would make someone, for example, dive to the deepest point of the ocean. Like why ego and craziness. And so when I'm writing these characters, that tends to be the thing that comes through is the obsession and the ego and the arrogance. And the film in a way has sort of like similar themes to Freeze in the way that like Freeze is all about this guy who wants to be the first to explore this and discover this area, and that's what is their downfall, because they're just pig-headed and they're just obsessed with trying to explore and go beyond what mankind should be really doing, and it all blows back in their face. And there's something fun about that. Gods of the Deep doesn't end well for anyone. and freeze doesn't end well for anyone. And that's kind of what's fun about Lovecraft, is it usually doesn't end well for anyone, you know?
I just realized as so gods, the title Gods of the Deep, like you probably have an idea of what that means. And I think the audience probably has their own idea of what that means. For me, I just realized that it's all those people think they have like control over something. And so they are the gods of the deep.
Yeah,
But
yeah, exactly.
they're not really, instead
Yeah,
of referring to like Cthulhu as being a god of the
yeah,
deep.
yeah,
Like, but
yeah,
there's
yeah,
only one Cthulhu. Where's the rest of them?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right. Good. I don't know if I have any other like burning questions for you. Is there, I guess I always ask people like if when they film their movie, if there were scenes that like they really liked that didn't make it into the final cut of the film.
hmm Yeah, I mean, there are a fair few scenes from this film that didn't make it in, um, but they kind of didn't make it in just because I just wanted the film to be. I mean, hopefully the film succeeds at being this, which is just fast-paced and streamlined. And these days when you're just watching things on streaming and stuff, you click on something. I can't stand it when it takes half an hour for something to actually happen in the
Uh-huh.
film. So in the film, there were all these scenes: Jim waking up in his house, getting ready for work, coming to work, and arriving at what the place that was meant to be Miskatonic University, and arriving there, and then arriving at the other research center with Julia Goldstein, and she walks him through the whatever it is, the lab, or walks him through the warehouse and gives him this whole spiel about the research they're doing. Well, I just cut everything down to its bare bones, so I could just have, there was no connective scenes. It was just, here's Jim, right now he's meeting everyone, right now they're on the submarine, so it just all moved way quicker. So there was a lot that went on the cutting room floor, but any of the good stuff, slime and tentacles and stuff, none of that got cut. That all stayed in.
Well, excellent. I appreciate that. And I do appreciate that it's like quick, like you get right into it.
Yeah.
And you don't really need to know a whole lot of these people's backstories because you kind of get the sense of their character from how they're acting right now. And that shows a good performance that they bring the character to life. Just, by the way they move and the way they speak and the way they interact with each other. Which is really
Yeah.
nice. So what's next for you, Charlie? Are you working on something right now? Do you have plans?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always busy working on stuff, so I mean, it'll take me a minute just to remember all the different things, but I
Well, how about
I
how about narrow it to are you working on anything Lovecraftian next or
do you know
soon?
what? I was thinking that because obviously I wasn't able to make it out to the Lovecraft Festival this year because I was in New York filming a Christmas horror movie. It's sort of like a Christmas horror comedy, um, called He Sees You When You're Sleeping. Um, so that's why I couldn't come. And next year I would love to come, and I'll do my very best to come, but I don't know if there's anything Lovecraftian in the pipeline, which is really sad because I'd love to come with something full blown Lovecraft. But I've just finished post production on a slasher movie, very like sort of Halloweeny themed. It was shot in Tennessee and it's called Night Harvest, and it's about a killer scare. It's essentially a killer scarecrow movie,
Mm.
but it's about a group of people on the run from the police because the main character has pyrokinetic powers, and so they come up against this evil scarecrow, and the whole point is scarecrow versus the guy who can set things on fire. So it's like the ultimate sort of battle because the scarecrow's made of straw and that's the only way to destroy him. So that's the sort of like Halloweeny slasher that I've just finished up. And then um, I've got a werewolf movie that I shot earlier this year it's a modern day, it's really different from all my other films. It's a modern day werewolf movie, all set in London. And it's very sort of like Clive Barker inspired. It has that sort of urban horror feel of like Candyman and stuff like that. So that is very almost finished as well. And then coming up in the pipeline, I'll be shooting all through early next year, and there's all sorts of stuff, but none of it I would say is Lovecraftian. But that could change. You know, it could. There's still time for a couple of these ideas are not quite developed. There's still time for it to change. So you know, if I can slip Lovecraft stuff in there, I will. You know.
Get some cosmic horror taint on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, very nice. So for our audience who wants to know more about your films and more about what you're working on, where can they find you on the internet?
So you can find me on Twitter at Dark Temple Films, and you can find me on Instagram just at Charlie Steeds, and yeah, and then just my website is darktemple.co.uk, and just yeah, go and check out my other movies on IMDb. Go on to you know Amazon, type in Charlie Steeds on Amazon, and everything will come up, whether it's DVDs, Blu-rays, free to watch on Prime. That's probably the best way to find my other stuff.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and talk about Gods of the Deep. And I hope that the audience enjoyed it and enjoyed this chat. And if you're watching this after this, we pre-recorded this. So if you have questions after you've watched this, log into our Discord server. The link is in the notes in the description of the video, and you can go on there and ask questions. Ask Charlie. He'll keep an eye out, and we'll let him know if there's questions in there for him as well. And then you might get an answer to your question. So thank you, everyone. Go watch the next thing now, and have a great streaming event. Thank you. And thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks for showing the movie, and thanks to everyone for watching it.
Okay. Bye, everyone.